Ladies and gentlemen, welcome here to Main Event DFS to our YouTube channel. My name is Adam Kohn. I am your host. This is our NFL Week 7 preview podcast for DFS that still needs a bleeping name. I think that might be just the podcast running joke. We still need a name for this podcast. I've thought of a couple, but they're kind of So it is what it is. But we are back here again. We're going to go over this Week 7 10-game main slate on DraftKings. Might be doing a FanDuel one soon. If you have any FanDuel questions, make sure you leave a comment down there below in this video. Or leave a comment down in Discord. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And while you're at it, hit a like button in this video. Hit that subscribe button. That way that you all know every single time one of these podcasts drop. And hit that notification bell as well. Alright, without any further ado, let's bring in our guest host here. Our guest host today. I know, shocker. It's like I worked at Arbor Pro or something. It's another Arbor Pro friend of mine. Today is one of the young guns in the industry, one of the best guys you probably have never heard of, but you should. He is known as Christian McCaffrey Late. He is Peter Gofen, a.k.a. Christian McCaffrey Late, a.k.a. Stanford guest football announcer extraordinaire. Not even football. He hosts it. He is the man, the myth, the legend of Picks with Pete. You can follow him on Twitter at Peter Jaguars. Let's bring him in here. Peter Gofen, ladies and gentlemen. Don't hold your applause. Keep going. Come on, crowd. We can hear you. Keep the applause going. Keep the applause going. Peter! What's happening? He's applauding for himself, ladies and gentlemen. Peter, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to this Week 7 preview pod. How you doing, my friend?
I am fantastic, Adam. What's good? Thank you very much for having me, as well as that wonderful intro. It is great throwback. It's like OG Picks with Pete, but here we are, 2021, rolling strong. And yeah, you mentioned it, calling Stanford football on the radio these days. So not as deep into the NFL DFS streets, but we're keeping an eye on stuff, cranking on Red Zone 7 hours every Sunday, and ready to roll with some great stuff here, armed with new knowledge and probability and gambling spaces and all that good stuff through my classes here as well. So ready to roll as always, and very happy to be on here with you.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'm very happy to have you on. I've been looking forward to this Week 7 edition since you and I were chit-chatting a couple weeks ago. I know there were certain people trying to get a lot of folks that I know and respect in the industry on these podcasts, and you, Jeremy, Mike, definitely some of the tops of the list. I'd be reaching out to some of our other Arbor Pro friends as well. Unless they get some other stuff going on. But the fans want to know, because you're talking Stanford football. Is this going to be a podcast where you're just going to do nothing but talk about David Mills? Or Davis Mills?
So we're going to stack them up. It's going to be the Mills, and we'll play McCaffrey even though he's not out there, just honorary member. Throw in some, Zach Ertz action, debuting for the Cardinals, all that good stuff. Definitely Stanford stack viable. I'm down for it.
He's kidding, folks. He's kidding. I just had to give him some crap because, look, this kid the reason I call him Christian McCaffrey Light, this is a kid that is built. He runs track. He's basically looks like a young version of Christian McCaffrey. Might be better than the running back GOAT of Christian McCaffrey. I hear the Panthers could use you, but I hear they have some kid, Chuba Hubbard, also who we're going to talk about. Speaking of which,
my hamstrings are more durable. We'll just put it that way. Got a better, stronger posterior chain. That's what I got on McCaffrey.
It's such a shame. Like, McCaffrey just missed so much time due to such random injuries. And, years ago we were talking about this. It's like he's being so overworked. Like, we don't want this coming back and biting him in the butt. And it's just they're weird freak injuries, too. Like, this year, some soft tissue injuries. And, you don't want to rush him back too soon. So, with that being said, let's get into it here, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're doing the new podcast version here, well, a new format. Instead of 4 games that we want to target, we're going to go to 3 games that we want to target. And we're going to start off with Peter's first game. Take it away, Mr. Gofen.
Let's do it. So obviously an interesting slate here where you got one really high totaled game. That's Chiefs-Titans. Not going to that one right here. But actually the game with the second highest total, hovering around 51 right now, is Lions-Rams. And this one actually has some quiet makings of great fantasy production despite looking lopsided. It's a heavy spread. LA's favored by 16 points. And so you look at that and say, hey, they're going to get up, deflate the ball, game over. But Detroit actually makes for a team that puts up good fantasy points in some of these situations. And so this year, the Lions have the second fastest second half pace of play and the eighth fastest pace of the play when trailing by 7+. In the second half of games, they're the most pass heavy offense in the league. So obviously we can run through the positions and all that good stuff. But just thinking about high level here, yes, it's forecasted as a blowout, but the Rams are projected with the team total of 33.5. That means they're going to put up points, factor in some garbage time from Detroit, and obviously should be some good pieces to target.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into it here. As always in the podcast, we are going to go position by position. Let's talk about it. The two quarterbacks for this game, Matt Stafford, revenge game. If you want to call, I didn't even think of that until I looked who the quarterback was.
Both ways.
It is both. Oh, well, it's Jared Goff. So
no, but yeah, I mean, he's got some frustrations with McVay. I think that I think you'd argue for Goff being more motivated than Stafford in terms of that angle.
Remind me who Jared Goff's throwing to again? Besides Amon-Ra St. Brown, don't worry, I'll wait.
I'm not saying to play him. I'm just saying that it's there. I'm not sure the quarterbacks are the stars here. Goff 5,000, Stafford's 7,100. I think there's obviously a case for Stafford. His ceiling's a bit capped. Highest DraftKings performance this year is 32.5 against Tampa.
I think you make a good point about his ceiling's being capped. I just want to cut you off real quick before we get into the rest of those stats. Your point about him being 7.1K on DraftKings, limited ceiling, it's Detroit. If the Rams get up, big like I think you and I probably think they'll go up to, I think Stafford isn't going to go crazy here.
I agree. Right, a lot of pieces I like here. It's probably not one where I'm going with some crazy onslaught. Yes, you can pair up Stafford. If you're doing him, maybe you're even picking 2 or 3, 3 even Rams pass catchers. On the other end, Goff I have no interest in. It's more the skill position guys that can take advantage of the scoring and volume. Just not having mobility as a QB right now is quite limiting. And so look at guys like Hurts being a little cheaper, Lamar being a little more expensive, and obviously Kyler, Mahomes, et cetera, up top. It's unlikely that Stafford puts together some crazy slate-making performance.
Yeah. On the other side of this game, you mentioned it, Jared Goff, probably the one who has a little bit more of a bone to pick, a little bit more of a revenge narrative. He's 5K. Any interest in Jared Goff this week?
No.
Yeah, I agree. There's really not much else to say here. It's just he's not playing with anybody. It's Goff, it's Swift, it's who's even on the Detroit side? It's Khalif Raymond, Cephas is on IR, St. Brown, Hodge.
Yeah, Hawkinson. So in a vacuum, if you were to stack up Goff, I'd probably go Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Hawkinson, and run it back with whoever you want from the Rams. But no, don't bother.
Yeah, Hawkinson also listed as questionable for this game and logged limited practices on Thursday and Friday. Again, over here, according to latest play news supplied by RotoWire. He's going to probably, like they say, probably continue playing through the knee injury. But it's a Rams defense that I just don't really want to mess with.
So let's talk running backs here, because I think that much of the appeal in this game, to my liking, is that these are probably my 2 favorite raw projected running backs on the slate. You've got Darrell Henderson, 6,600. Mm-hmm. He's bumped up a little bit in price, hadn't been more than 6,000 before this game. I still think he is significantly too cheap. If we were looking at Todd Gurley a few seasons ago at 6,600, he would be an absolute lock button for everyone. And I understand there's some different circumstances here, perhaps one of them being that the Rams have a better quarterback such that they don't need to go to the ground game as much. But Henderson's been getting great volume in his healthy games, averaging something like 19.4 opportunities per game. He's getting some good snap shares. He's more or less healthy right now and, chips in a little bit in terms of the receiving work. Always a good bet to reach the end zone at least once. I'm definitely in on him. On the other end, you have Deandre Swift, who, yes, he's questionable. He's been questionable literally every single week this season. Not too much to worry about with that groin injury for him. His target floor has been 5 in every game, 42 targets on the season, which is absolutely wild for a running back. And so that looks, good for his liking, regardless of how many points they get down. Lions actually have the highest running back target rate in the league at 27%. I think there's a case you could even play for both of these guys together, but I'd most certainly be jamming in one of them in cash and a good bit in my tournament lineups as well.
Yeah, and we should also probably preface this by saying you're more of a cash game guy than you are a GPP guy. Or is that still the
Back
case?
in the day. Nowadays, nah, I can't touch cash games nowadays. But I still got a mentality for it.
Okay.
I got a mentality for it because I think you need to now sort of, in theory, who are the guys who you would just jam into an optimal. Getting more interested to sort of the GPP lifestyle and whatnot. These guys can still fit in, though. You can be overweight on them. There are plenty of running backs in consideration and running backs to the position that I'm still comfortable being most chalky just to, get the guys that are studs, especially when they're from games that I expect to be high scoring.
All right, so you're saying we want to target Henderson and Swift and Jamal Williams? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
So yeah, I'm not bothering with Williams or Michelle. There's obviously a chance that those guys could sprinkle in a little bit, and I do anticipate that Michelle will pull a few carries off Henderson, probably get even 8 to 10 touches if the Rams really run away with this game. But I'd be prioritizing the alphas there. They're not too expensive to make them worth putting in.
You really have no concern with Swift against this Rams defense, do you?
I like volume, right? Like, take a look at his target counts. He's getting, 5+ every single game. Last 3 games, 7, 6, 6. He's still hovering in that 8 to 14 carry range. And so he doesn't need to do that much on the ground to help put it together with the receiving work. I know, obviously, it's ceiling game for him. We'd want to be getting something like 4X, and it's not like he's blown that out of the water at any point this season. But with how depleted this Lions team is, they're going to be going through him. He's been playing, plenty of snaps, 75% of snaps over his last 3 games. Definitely a guy who's going to be on the field getting looks. No, the matchup's not concerning for me.
Matchup's more of a concern for me, but I get the volume play. Henderson, definitely someone you and I are very high on the slate. And I agree. Michelle is nothing more than if they start pulling the starters, they go up 24 plus, and Michelle starts seeing some more of the work so they can preserve Henderson. I think it'll be difficult for Detroit to put up 24 points total in this game. So, with that being said, let's move on to the pass catchers here. Let's move on to the wide receivers, and we'll get to the tight ends in a little bit. But let's talk about arguably the best wide receiver right now in the NFL, fantasy points-wise, and that's Koopa Cup. Cooper Cup this season doesn't have under 11.4 fantasy points, and that was his worst game.
Not only that, we talk about volume. This dude's had double-digit targets in every single game, leads the league in team market share at 34%. He's 8,400 now, so the price keeps climbing. Started the year at 5,500, which was egregiously cheap. Now he's in the mix of being in there with the top wide receivers. I think you can still plug him in. Absolutely. This is not some secondary that you need to be worried about. The Lions have allowed the most yards per completion, 13.5 of any team in the league. I'm totally good jamming in, Cup at this price. And if you were to stack up the Rams, he's a guy that makes a lot of sense to have in there.
Agreed. Now, again, this is the conversation I feel like we're having every bleeping week. Cup versus Woods or both. I think the answer here is Stafford plus Cup plus Woods. Here's the thing. Woods is $2,000 cheaper. But here's the problem with Robert Woods. He's seen 1 game with double-digit targets in all the games this season. I'm sorry, that's a problem.
Yeah, so Woods had, the squeaky wheel game against Seattle where obviously 12, 150, no touchdowns for him, but still put up 30 DK points. That was great. And it went back to being the Cooper Cup show once again. I actually have another guy on this team who would be maybe my next favorite pass catcher to stack, but we'll get to him. Woods is totally fine to work in, don't get me wrong, but 6,400 when you look at some of the other names that are in that range. Yes, this is a game I want pieces from. I'm not going significantly out of my way to force in Woods.
I would agree with that. Let's talk about the other pass catchers here, and if you say Desean Jackson, I'm kicking you off the podcast.
All right. Well, so let's let's make mention of Van Jefferson and Desean Jackson, right? 3,500, 3,400,
Mm-hmm.
respectively. These guys are both splash play type guys. Jefferson had 6 for 90 and a touchdown against Arizona. Desean Jackson had his, one big game against Tampa where he had 3 for 120 and a touchdown. I'm okay if you want to plug in these guys as, GPP flyers because it only takes one or two deep shots for them to pay off. But no, I'm not. I'm not building a core around them or anything like that. There are
No,
other
of
cheap
course.
wideouts you can go to that have more stable sort of situations.
And folks, I'm only kidding. I'm only giving Peter crap because when we were talking pre-show, he was talking about Desean Jackson and trying to speak that into existence. And I just look, Desean Jackson is one of these plays over the last several years where if you want to play him in a large field GPP or you want to draft him on season long, you do it in best ball. You do it in where someone you can set it and forget it. And when he has the ceiling games, well, if you're a best ball, it's just gonna count. And when he stinks and doesn't have a good game, it's not gonna count against you. Hopefully. Van Jefferson has more of the skill at this point in their careers. Desean Jackson's nothing more than a burner at this point in his career. Van Jefferson, I think, has the more skill. He's probably the two I'm going to target. It's probably Cup, Jefferson, Woods, and Jackson for me. This just feels like a stay away game for Woods for me, but you can tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's not stay away in the sense that I like it overall. But in terms of the pickings and factoring in price and ownership and whatnot, he's not going to be rising to the top of my lineups. Jefferson is playing around twice as many snaps as Jackson, for what it's
Yeah,
worth. On the Lions side, you mentioned Cephas on IR, so Khalif Raymond 6 catches, 37 yards against Cincinnati. He's at 4,700. That feels a little bit frisky. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 4,100, probably more palatable in
he's the one I
terms of the
want.
price. He's come
He's
down
the
a
one I
little bit.
want.
Last 3 games for St. Brown, 887 targets. And so he's totally getting the volume there. Very much a PPR preferred type play, but
Yep.
I think he's someone that you could work into even a cash type lineup. And obviously he has the upside as well if he reaches the end zone.
He's the one where if you're stacking with, like, if you're doing a, let's just say you're doing a 2 to 3 man stack that includes Stafford. Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably the wide receiver that you want as a run back, in my
Well,
opinion.
I think you can go. I think you can go Swift as a bring back. I just want to point that out as far as his receiving workload and Hawkinson too. I always love to knock out tight ends in my stacks
I
just
mean,
because
like
it's
wide
a
receiver
tough
wise,
position.
of
Yes,
yeah, just of
if
the
I had to
wide
pick a Lions wide
receivers,
receiver,
right?
it's St. Brown.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, I don't tend to advocate running it back with the running back. The correlation typically isn't there. But I can easily see it. Detroit's probably going to want to slow this game down. I can make the exception for Swift based on the points you made earlier, and they're probably going to want to slow the pace of play down in this game to keep that high-powered Rams offense off the field. Well, you were talking about it. I'm assuming the next person you're going to want to talk about is one of these two tight ends here for the Rams. Yes?
Yeah, Bryson Hopkins. Just kidding. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is Tyler Higbee here. He's 4,500, and one thing that I'm always trying to be on is ahead of the curve. When we see it with Tyler Higbee, it will be too late. Right now, we haven't seen that big game yet. He's at 79% routes per drop back right now, which among tight ends in the league is obviously top notch. I think that one of these days we're going to have a big Tyler Higbee game. It might not be this week, but it very well could be this week also. I'm going to be there for it. Definitely in on him at this price. And Hawkinson being 5,100 as well. You get, good savings to go down for the team that's projected twice as many points. Nothing wrong with Hawkinson too, but I definitely like Higbee a lot in this spot. You can play him on his own as sort of just a solo piece of this game. You do a mini stack, I think something like Higbee Swift or Higbee St. Brown if you're just trying to get, overall secondary correlation. And obviously, if you want to full stack up the Rams, Higbee would be someone I'd want to be working in there. So.
I 100% agree with you. I think both of these tight ends are firmly in play. And again, sorry about the Desean Jackson take, only busting your chops there. It's not as crazy as one might think. Anything else you want to talk about with this game before we move on to our second of our three games here?
Just a couple more high-level notes on LA. They're at the second fastest situation neutral pace of play, so they will be pushing the tempo here for sure. And other than the one sort of dud game against Arizona, Rams have put up 26 plus points in every game. So good likelihood for them to be scoring, right? That puts you at something like 4 touchdowns. Obviously, there are going to be guys who put up good stats.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on here to our second game unless you got any other thoughts.
Go for it.
Excellent. All right, here we go. We're going to move on to our second game here, and this is my pick. A game that I absolutely have interest in, that I absolutely want exposure to this week, is going to be the Washington football team at the Green Bay Packers. We start this off over here at our quarterback situation, and I want to note as well that as of Friday night, as we record this thing, it is 8:31 p.m. This game is currently sitting at a 48 over-under. I will refresh to make sure I get you all the most accurate information. Still sitting at a 48 over-under. Look, here's the deal with this game. Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Devonte Adams. That's my favorite stack of the week. I will spoil it now before you all listen to that segment at the end. Rodgers, Jones, Adams, my favorite stack of the week. But let's not sleep on Taylor Heinicke. Let's talk about it. Taylor Heinicke is way too... He's just too cheap this week. He's going against the high-powered Packers offense. I'm sorry, the high-powered Rodgers, Jones, Adams Packers offense in a game where the Washington football team is most likely going to be playing from behind on the road. Now, I want to keep this in mind, and want all of you to keep this in mind as well. The Packers are giving up the 7th fewest passing yards versus opposing quarterbacks this season. However, the Packers have allowed 13 touchdowns this season, which is the 6th highest in the league this season. I think Heinicke is a great GPP play this week. What say you, Mr. Gofen?
So, yeah, a couple ways to look at this one. One is that Washington's had some games with Heinicke where they're able to get into semi-competitive shootouts. The one against Atlanta is probably the best example. That was Heinicke's best game. Green Bay is very concentrated. That's obviously nice. And so Devonte Adams being the most expensive wide receiver on the slate, you need him to be effectively the number one guy to make it worth it. I'm not sure I'm quite as bullish on the game environment as a whole. The Packers are unlikely to have some remarkable volume here because when they get up, they tend to sort of go balanced or slow things down. And, that means some Aaron Jones. That also means some A.J. Dillon, who against the Bears had 11 carries and 8 against Cincinnati and 15 against Pittsburgh. And so, losing some of those spots there because you don't really want to end up playing Dillon. It's just prying things away from the other guys that you are plugging in. I think I have mixed feelings on this game. I'm obviously going to be good with the core skill position guys here, and Terry McLaurin's off the injury report too, so no issue if you want to go with him. On the aggregate, I don't know that I'm going wild in this spot.
Well, let's continue breaking it down. So let's go to the running backs here in this game. Like I said, Aaron Jones, $7,500. He's about $1,000 too cheap in this matchup because Aaron Jones is very heavily involved in this matchup. Let's also talk about Antonio Gibson. I've been talking about this for weeks. Is Green Bay on the slate? Yes. Is there a running back versus Green Bay? Yes. We play said running back against Green Bay. Now, Gibson's listed here with a questionable tag. He's dealing with, I believe, a shin injury.
He has a stress fracture in his shin, and just contextually, that's the type of thing that does not heal if you don't rest it, and he's trying to continue playing through this. I think that's a huge red flag for DFS and also for Gibson as a season-long guy. I'm worried that they might have to shut him down at some point.
It would not surprise me. The question is, do they shut him down this week against if they're doing their research, this is a funnel defense. Green Bay is a funnel. They make you run the ball. Well, they shut you down the pass, and you have to run against them. They're terrible against the run. And I have interest in Gibson, but I also got interest in McKissick. $5,000. He's the pass-catching running back against Green Bay. If Gibson's out, McKissick is going to be one of my favorite plays on the entire slate for $5,000. He's a great value. And you talked about A.J. Dillon here, $4,600. I have no interest in Dillon unless Green Bay goes up super high, which I don't see them doing in this game. I still have some respect for this Washington football team. But for me, I think McKissick's a very interesting GPP play as of this recording. Keep an eye to Lock on Sunday. injury news rather. If Gibson is ruled out, McKissic is one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Anything else you want
Yeah,
to talk about here with the running backs?
with the way DraftKings is pricing running backs nowadays, it's hard to go that deep and find guys who you say are true value. And so McKissic at 5,000 is obviously someone who you're able to work in. Him and Gibson are splitting things kind of tight right now. It's something like 56 to 44% in terms of the snaps. McKissic's target share is up near 14%. It's only getting 7.7 touches per game, but you have to think if Gibson is limited at all, that's going to skew things McKissic's way in a contest where they are forecasted to play from behind, and with him having essentially that exact scenario last week against Kansas City, going 8 catches on 10 targets for 65 yards and a total of 19 DraftKings points, I'm totally good with him. Yep. Aaron Jones is, obviously always fine to plug in. I have no problem with it. I just wish that Dylan wasn't, scraping things away from him a little bit.
Same issue we had with Jamal Williams last year. It's just a different name. I will say this. I don't like Aaron Jones as much as I like Rodgers and Adams. But if you're going to 3-stack this game, I think you include Jones because as we get here into the wide receivers, Peter, it's Adams and then who? Right? Like, is it Lazard? Is it Randall Cobb? Like, Lazard's been seeing more and more targets each week. He saw 5 targets last week and caught a touchdown. Randall Cobb has been seeing up and down. He didn't catch anything last week. Broke out and had a random good game against Pittsburgh with 2 touchdowns. It's more of like a good luck trying to figure out who Rodgers is going to throw to, which is why I'm putting Jones in that stack over one of these 2 wide receivers. That is my opinion, but I think Adams overall is one of, if not the best wide receiver play on this entire slate.
Yeah, so worth noting that Aaron Jones is second on the team in target share with 11.9%. You know who's number one, of course, Devonte Adams. He's not number one for the Packers. He's number one in the league with 34.2%. And I think that it would be wonderful if, they kind of slipped his price down a little bit more because he hasn't had, a ton of his ceiling type games. Obviously, the huge one against the Bengals. Truth is, him only having 2 touchdowns this year is kind of absurd, just given the type of production that we often see from him in the red zone. There's going to be another one of those huge Devonte games soon. I think this very well could be it. He's obviously someone who you can plug in as much as you'd like.
I agree. Terry McLaurin on the Washington football team side of things is my go-to target in this game. Like you mentioned, he is off the injury report. The question is Jair Alexander going to play in this game? Is Alexander off the injury report? Do we know this?
No, they put him on IR, so he has to miss. They put him on IR a couple weeks ago. He has to miss at least 3 games. So no Jair. It's obviously no corner group that you're worried about.
Nope. Happy Terry McLaurin week. If we're playing him and expecting a ceiling week, 6,900 is a lot to ask. I think McLaurin is going to have a very good week. We talk about some of the other Washington football team wide receivers here. We talk about Mr. Dynemy Brown with Curtis Samuel out, already ruled out for this game. Brown is now done with that knee injury. He's seeing an increase in targets. Brown, rookie wide receiver for the football team. Someone to keep an eye on. Adam Humphries, not someone I'm really interested in. The interesting name I want to talk about is Deandre Carter. This is a guy that against New Orleans had 8 targets. Didn't get a touchdown, but I think that's interesting worth noting. But in the high shootout game that should have been last week versus Kansas City, only saw 1 target and did not bring that target down. I think Carter's someone in large field GPPs I'm fine with like 5% on. But I think it's McLaurin and Dynemy Brown in that order. And yeah, anything else you want to talk about here with the wide receivers?
Carter went from playing 70% of the snaps against the Saints to just 20% against Kansas City. It's just not on the field enough to really work him in. I do think Dynemy Brown is someone to keep our eyes on, not only this week DFS, but obviously long term as well. So,
Dynasty
yes, you can sprinkle him in. Yeah, and obviously worth keeping on the radar going forward.
Absolutely. Tight ends in this game. Logan Thomas on IR. It was Ricky Seals Jones week last week, and Robert Tonyan, $3,500. And I have interest in both of these tight ends. I just don't know how crazy heavy I'm going to be with these tight ends. What about you?
RSJ, I mean, he's effectively, I don't think he's as good as Logan Thomas as a player, but he has, nearly the same role. And so with that in mind at 3,700, sure, absolutely. I mean, he's, one of the cheaper viable tight ends. I think you can totally plug him in. Tonyan has done nothing outside of his one game where he had the touchdown. And so he doesn't have more than 3 DraftKings points in any other contest. Yeah, you could throw him in because, pray for a tight end touchdown is always a viable one, and the Packers are implied to score the 5th most points on this slate.
Yep.
But of these two guys, RSJ would be my lean.
That's definitely interesting. I would agree with that purely based on they need someone to catch the ball. The Washington football team is giving up the 6th most receiving yards versus opposing tight ends this season. However, they've only given up 1 touchdown. Look, tight end stats are noisy. I admit it. But the Packers have given up 3 touchdowns versus opposing tight ends. So let's keep this in mind. I think we could probably sprinkle in these cheap tight ends this week. All right, Mr. Gofen. Anything else you want to talk about with this game? Because I'm done with this game. I'm ready to get on to the main event.
Let's do it.
Main event time, ladies and gentlemen. You know what time it is. You know the game that that Peter and I most likely want to target. Peter, Kansas City, Tennessee is where we're going. It's the highest over-under on this entire slate. The over-under currently sitting, as I refresh the page here, at 57.5. Kansas City favored by 4.5. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Patrick Mahomes, 8,400, Tannehill, 6,400. Am I right in assuming this is the game that we both want to talk about this week?
Yeah, I mean, right, it's a no-brainer, and it's no secret. So I think that whenever we have a game like this where you look at it and say, hey, it is a total that's 6.5 points higher than every other game on the slate, we need to get creative in terms of the ways that we're attacking it. And so maybe whether that's looking for guys who are a little bit cheaper or slightly contrarian ways to stack or doing bringbacks that, won't be normal or stacking up heavier with a full game stack as opposed to, total of 3 guys or whatever. That's all stuff to factor in. But obviously this game is where it is for a reason. It is very liable to go to a shootout. And Mahomes at 8,400 is, the star of the show. I mean, these are, I want to say, the 2 worst defenses in the league in terms of DVP versus QBs so far. Mahomes is, I think, maybe the QB1 or certainly around it right now. Obviously, play him if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I said assume, folks, is when I was putting together our show doc notes, I'm just like, I'm looking over all the games and I'm like, this is probably the one that both of us are going to really want to talk about. We got our individual games, but I'm like, this is probably the consensus game for every daily fantasy player this week. So, Peter, you are correct. We have to find ways to get different. Mahomes, 8,400. Tannehill, 6,400. I think it's going to be very expensive, again, to go Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey. I've been saying this for weeks, and pretty much all season I have my bold take where I said Kansas City's kind of a one-trick pony right now. It's Mahomes, it's Hill, it's Kelsey. Doesn't mean you can stop Hill or Kelsey. It's just they're kind of sort of a one-trick pony. Hardman slowly stepping up into that number 2 role, but they're not exactly getting much out of Robinson. They're not getting much out of Pringle. I think Pringle's a little underrated. But, their running back situation is what it is. Daryl Williams might give them a little bit of extra spark in this game, but I get interest in Mahomes. I just don't know if I'm going to get there at 8,400 and Tannehill at 6,400. I probably get more interested in the run back, but what say you with the quarterbacks?
Yeah, it's right. Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey is always wonderful, and then you try to plug it in, and all of a sudden, I think you're at something like 4,200 remaining for your next 6 guys, and it gets really challenging to fit that in, given you have to place a running back in the lineup. So, sure, you can do it. I think maybe more pragmatic is Mahomes, one of those 2, and then you can pick another Chiefs guy that you think's going to pay off. It's still good to get some Chiefs exposure. You don't want to get cute and ignore them just because it's difficult to build. Tannehill on the other side hasn't really had anything special this year. They are just continuously feeding Derrick Henry. And yes, against this Chiefs defense. We'll probably see a heavy dose of Henry once again, but at some point you're going to get some of those Tannehill read option touchdowns and whatnot, and he could have a splash performance. So I'd still keep the lights on for him, knowing that he's had 17 or more rushing yards in 4 games this season. That rushing equity still exists. Obviously, I'm not going to be going as heavy on it as some of the other QBs this week.
Agreed. Well, that's it for the quarterbacks. Not much to say. Both the good plays this week. Both opposing defenses are terrible. But let's talk about the best running back on the entire slate, King Henry, Mr. Derrick Henry, $9,200, still sub 10,000. McNichols listed as questionable for this game. Practiced limited on Thursday. He suffered an ankle injury Monday night versus the Bills. Happy Derrick Henry week.
Does it matter whether McNichols is healthy or not? I mean, it's just absurd volume.
Well, see, here's the thing. Here's the thing about McNichols. He's been involved in the receiving game. 8 receptions, 12 targets versus the Jets, 2 last week at 2 versus Jacksonville. He's been used, and Buffalo's defense is what it is, but he got injured in that game. So I mean, it's not exactly like Sergeant Carter or a Blossom game are really going to threaten Henry in any kind of sort of way here. It's Derrick Henry week, and I think that Henry is one of the best players on the entire slate.
Yeah, so in retrospect, you do make a good point about McNichols, because that receiving work is going to be important for Henry. Sure, if the Titans end up winning this game, running away with it, then Derrick Henry has 162 carries through 6 weeks, and I wouldn't be worried about volume at all. There's a chance that Kansas City leads.
His usage is ridiculous.
There's a chance, right, and a very reasonable one given their favor, that Kansas City leads and we don't get our big, heavy dosage of Derrick Henry carries. And so that then does turn to, is he getting factored in the receiving game, or are they just going to keep hammering him, playing from behind? I'm not as high on Derrick Henry as you. My sense is that you'd probably just want to be plugging him in pretty much everywhere. I think there are avenues for him where he only puts up like 13 DraftKings points, and at 9,200, honestly, if he's below 25, he's not really exceeding value, or he's not a have-to-have type guy. So I think you obviously get some of him, right? With what he's done, you'd be silly to fade as well, sort of in the same vein as Mahomes and co. But I'm not locking in Derrick Henry to lineups across the board.
I don't lock in anybody to lineups, but I will say I will be overweight compared to the field on Derrick Henry this week, if I can help it. Again, it's all going to depend on injuries, right? Like if value opens up and like I can play a ton of McKissick, I might have more Derrick Henry. If I can't play a lot of McKissick, or if I can't play a lot of, some of these other cheaper options, it's crazy. But let's, talk about on the other side of this game, Daryl Williams. What a week he had last week. Daryl Williams showing why he is the clear backup to Clyde. I wouldn't say he's superior to Clyde, but versus Washington, 21 attempts, 62 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he was even involved in the receiving game, 4 targets, 3 receptions for 27 yards, 23.9 DraftKings points last week. Daryl Williams, $5,800 this week, someone I have a lot of interest in.
Yeah, you wish his price hadn't come up quite so much. He was $4,900 last week in 58 years.
Below 6,000.
Yeah, it's a great spot in terms of the overall game environment. At the same time, he is very touchdown reliant, right? His total receiving work got him 5.7 points. His ground efficiency was, limited at best. And so those touchdowns boosted up his day. I don't think you can bank on him scoring 2 touchdowns. If he reaches the end zone once, yeah, he's probably about meeting value, but it's not blowing anything up. I think as an ancillary piece from this game and a pivot off the other Chiefs guys who are going to have high ownership, absolutely you can plug in Daryl. But if I were deciding in a vacuum between like him and DeAndre Swift at 6,000, I'm going Swift, most of the time.
That's fair. I think I'd probably end up on the Williams side of things. But yeah, like that's the only interest I really have in anyone in this game. I have no interest in McKinnon. However, I think McKinnon's interesting if you want to get great ways to get crazy different on the slate, but like 3 attempts last week for only
No,
10 yards,
no.
4 targets, 1 reception. No, thank you.
Carroll had 21 of the team's 28 rushing attempts. He's
Yep,
the guy if you're picking one.
I would agree with that. Now, should we get into the fun piece? The wide receivers. Tyreek Hill. He's freaking good at football. I know. Hashtag analysis. He's good at football, but he's listed as questionable in this game. And so isn't Julio Jones. Tell us and talk to us, Peter, about the wide receivers here this week.
Yeah, so Tyreek's got that quad issue, didn't practice Thursday or Friday. It sounds like he is still going to be able to suit up here. I think there's a chance that we don't necessarily see full steam Tyreek Hill, and if he isn't on the field as much as usual, Mecole Hardman would be kind of the guy that you would expect to step up. Him being another one of those guys where, say, as an ancillary piece to get some exposure to this game, I think you can plug him in. Julio's got a hamstring issue, and he said today that he feels great and is excited about Sunday. Have to think he's going to try to, battle it out. Who knows how much he plays? I think that's a very dangerous one. Maybe a tournament, large field tournament thing if you want to get exposure at low ownership, because people will be going to AJ Brown, who still had his whole, illness or whatever that made him sick, but put up good stats against Buffalo and can honestly be in a smash spot here as a pivot off Henry. I do like going to the receiving game. Brown's safer than Julio right now, 6,300. I mean, that's a pretty appealing one to plug in.
Why is he so freaking cheap?
Yeah, Brown started the season at 7,100 and obviously has had some stuff limiting him and whatnot, but he's come down too far, especially Tennessee being underdogs. Tannehill drops back more than usual and coming off a 9-target game and what was a high-scoring affair. I think that A.J. Brown is someone who you could consider in any type of contest.
One of my favorite plays, by far, one of my favorite wide receiver plays on the slate. He's too cheap. He's too cheap! Now, so we know Hill, if he plays, and we have to know, he needs to not be limited. If Tyreek Hill is limited, I think that's a problem for this entire offense. Would you agree?
It slows him down, but it doesn't preclude, having explosive plays and whatnot. I mean, Hardman is someone who can get behind the defense. Kelsey can bear a massive target share if necessary. Mahomes can pull some other wacky throws out of his butt. I wouldn't be sounding the panic alarm if it's not full steam Tyreek Hill, but, it would change the way you look at things.
Yeah, so let's talk about Mr. Mecole Hardman, 4,300, been getting more and more involved in the Chiefs' offense. Finally, only took him several years. $4,300. He's someone I think we can get different on the slate with. You made mention of it. How are we going to get different off of all the chalk pieces? Hardman, I think, is someone we get different.
Yeah, 4,300 here, and the game against Buffalo, 12 targets, only 5 last week against Washington. But all it really takes for Hardman, he's another one of those guys where give him one 40-yard touchdown, and all of a sudden he's more than done his job basically. So I'm totally happy to plug him in, especially knowing that there's always a chance of re-injury for Tyreek, or that we don't know pregame, but it turns out that they tell us 10 minutes into the broadcast, oh, by the way, he's not going to be playing 100% of snaps, all that good stuff.
Happy injury reporting. There's one player here I think we need to talk. Well, 2 players we need to talk about. Let's talk about the one I think is the most interesting on the Tennessee side of things. Chester Rogers is out. Westbrook-Ikhine, 3,300. Julio, hamstring injury, says he's going to play. I think Westbrook-Ikhine is someone we can take chances on in large field GPPs only. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think especially if Julio's out or said to be limited, then right, him and Marcus Johnson are the guys who are going to be on the field. And whenever you can get guys who are playing snaps in these types of games where you think that it doesn't take a lot for them to do much, but you expect there to be points, sure, I'm good with it. I'm definitely good with it.
I'm surprised Josh Reynolds doesn't see any more play.
As very much a disappointment as someone who, in theory, was going to be mixed in, and then I think it's been a healthy scratch of recent.
So the last thing we need to talk about just because he's back in the NFL and I'm happy for him, is one Mr. Josh
No,
Gordon.
no.
I said we gotta talk about him. I didn't say we had to play him. Jeez.
I love Josh Gordon. 11 snaps against Washington, no targets. You're not playing him in fantasy right now.
No. But I think it would. Is it gonna surprise me if I hear Josh Gordon 2 receptions, 1 touchdown, 80 yards? No. But I think that's also asking a lot. I think 80 yards and a touchdown, I think, is also asking for a lot for a guy that's just, his second or this third week back in the league? I think that's also asking for a lot. Let's move on to the tight ends here. People like playing Ferkser. I got no problem playing Ferkser this week. Not exactly seeing much volume. If you need a punt tight end, he's fine. Kansas City, 31st right here, according to DraftKings, against tight ends. Travis Kelsey. I know, shocker, surprise. We played Travis Kelsey. He was dealing with a neck injury, but the injury designation has been removed. Any concerns about Kelsey?
No. And Kelsey's always great. 7,600, right? He gets into the consideration of if we're a wide receiver at 7,600, would you want to play him? That would make him the 5th most expensive wide receiver, which is totally reasonable. I'm 100% fine playing Kelsey.
I would agree with that as well. All right. Anything else you want to talk about here with this game?
All good on my end.
Excellent. All right. Then let's move on to our next segment here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to move on to our GPP only games or fade games segment. Peter, kick us off. Are you going to be talking about a GPP only game, or are you going to be talking about a game that we want to fade?
Let's talk GPPs here. And the game that I have pulled out is Bengals Ravens. This one being in Baltimore. Sitting here with one of the lower totals on the slate, actually, 46.5 right now. Baltimore favored by 6.5. And so this is not one that a ton of people are going to go to, and probably not that there will be 4 players that have pop-off scores. But the question is, could there be 1 or 2? And my sense is, yes, there can be a few guys that pop out. I think that Joe Mixon is always in consideration where he's getting good volume right now. Obviously, lots of work in the receiving game against Detroit, so sprinkle him in. As far as receiving weapons go, Rashad Bateman is someone who I pulled out later as sort of being a value play. He had 6 targets, 4 catches against the Chargers.
Stop talking about him! We want to play, we want to win! No, but Bateman's someone I've been high on. I stashed him in almost every league that I had an IR spot for in season long that I could get Bateman everywhere in redraft. Didn't really get him in Dynasty. Wasn't high on him then. The more and more I heard about him, the more and more he was good in camp. Marquis Brown last week clearly didn't want to lose his job. He played nuts. Does not want to lose the number 1 job to Rashad Bateman. So, in all seriousness, Rashad Bateman, 3,400, definitely a value play. And a great play this week. Talk to us about the rest of this game.
Yeah, and then just other guys to consider, right? Lamar's coming off a quieter game following the blow up against the Colts. And so if you can grab him at lower ownership, 7,400 for Lamar is always going to be a healthy price. Jamar Chase is continuously putting up great numbers. His price has come down a little bit, so 6,200, a bit more palatable to plug in, even against a solid secondary. And then another guy who I think goes under-owned because his price is kind of bumped up is Mark Andrews. He's at 6,000 now. Hasn't been that high at any point this season. Only 5,200 last week. Yes, Bateman's in. That's going to take a little bit more work away potentially, but people aren't going to want to sit on Andrews at 6,000. You look at the tight ends as a whole, you're probably either going up to Kelsey Waller or sneaking into Pitts below, or going down to guys like Hawkinson, Gesicki, Higbee, so forth. And so at that point, I think Andrews flies a little bit under the radar. There's no reason that he can't continue being the tight end one that he's been of recent. And so definitely a guy who I like for tournaments.
I would agree with that. Just for our listeners and for me as well, we'll go position by position again. Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. Lamar at 7,400, Burrow 6,200. Are these quarterbacks that you're going to include in your player pool, or are these definitely GPP only, play him if you want.
Lamar, GPP play. Burrow, I don't think I'm going to this week. The Bengals are not passing as much as we would like, and so I don't really see the huge ceiling on him for the moment when he's dropping back, 20, 30, 35 times.
I would agree with that. Now, one thing we need to talk about that I think we're kind of overlooking a little bit, Latavius Murray been ruled out for this game. I don't know why. Tyson Williams has continued to lose touches. He looked good to start the season. This kid has been good, but for whatever reason, Harbaugh is just trusting the veterans. Is it Devonte Freeman time? 4,400, or are we really playing Le'Veon Bell?
I have a hard time putting in any of these guys. Right, you had the trio: Murray, Bell, Devonte, all had rushing touchdowns last week. It's just tough to figure it out. Murray played the most snaps, and so the other two were at 22 and 21. They're basically splitting time. Then you got Tyson Williams, who's going to bump back in. I don't think I can get any of these running backs in here, honestly.
I think if I had to play one, it's Freeman. If I had to play one, like desperation play, I need to fit a cheap running back in. If you had to pick one in this game, I think it's Freeman for me. Mixon is getting a ton of work, a ton of volume. Someone we're interested in, right?
Absolutely, right. He's just continuously getting good workloads and whatnot, and his price has stayed in a very healthy range. So really, however this game goes, I think that he's got a chance to be solid. And Chris Evans caught that touchdown, but Joe Mixon was able to chip in one himself and go 26 or so DraftKings points.
Yep.
Week 6. I think you can get him in here in week 7.
I agree. Now let's talk about, in terms of rankings, you talked about Chase, you talked about Higgins, you talked about Boyd. If you had to rank these three, Chase at $6,200, like you mentioned, against a good Baltimore pass defense. Chase, Higgins, Boyd, if you had to rank them 1, 2, 3 in terms of who you would play preference-wise, how are you ranking the 3 Cincinnati wide receivers?
I think that you kind of got to sit them exactly where they're priced. Chase is leading the team in target share with 23.4%, and he's obviously continuing to bounce around in terms of his price. Went as high as 6,700, now back to 6,200, but he's just looking real solid. Higgins was out for a bit, and that's where Boyd kind of had his best week. Now he's back into the fold with 7 and 6 targets compared to just 5 and 3 for Boyd. I'm inclined to, line them up in that order. Chase, the one I'm most likely to have. If you want to play Higgins as well, you could go there. Probably not going to Boyd in this spot.
I would agree with you. So I think they are actually listed appropriately: Chase, Higgins, and Boyd in that order. You talked about Rashad Bateman, but let's also talk about the current number 1 on this team in Hollywood Brown, $5,800. I'm interested in some Hollywood Brown here. I think it's a great play.
Yeah, I'm not wild about it. I think I'd rather go to Andrews at 6K than Brown to 5,800, knowing that I'd rather just, knock out my tight end spot. And Andrews probably a little more stable on a week-to-week basis, but Brown's, right? I mean, he's in that same vein of his splash games are good splash games. And he's actually a guy who's, not afraid of the end zone too, even from closer in. So I'm good with Brown at 58, but it's also possible I just don't have much, if any, of him.
Yeah. I think for me it's opposite. If I had to pick between the two, I'd pick Marquis Brown over Andrews, just because there are probably a lot of cheaper tight ends that I prefer. But I think Andrews definitely, like you said, solid, more stable. Hollywood Brown definitely someone boom or bust, kind of, sort of. I think Duvernay is nothing more than boom bust, but I love Rashad Bateman this week, $3,400. Look, didn't do much with his target load last week. First game off the injury report. Saw 6 targets. Caught 4 of them for 29 yards. Didn't really do much. Chargers defense was eh. But still, when you have 3 rushing touchdowns, Lamar, the running back himself, I think Bateman is primed to start taking over this offense. I think we start seeing it this week. I want to make one other... Go ahead.
They invested, first round pick in him. Draft capital is a good predictor for guys getting looks, and 6 targets indicates they want to use them.
Yep, I would agree with that. Let's not also forget that Hollywood Brown, I believe, also a first round pick of theirs. Let's talk about one last player. I think he was a first rounder, right? Hollywood Brown was a first rounder for the Ravens?
He was, yeah.
That's
I
what I
want to
thought.
say something like the 25th pick in 2019.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Somewhere down. I know the Ravens had a later pick that year, I think. I want to talk about one other player. Not Hollywood Brown's draft capital, but we want to talk about CJ Uzoma. 3,000. I'm talking punt tight end that has been involved in getting touchdowns. He's got 3 touchdowns on the season. I think Uzoma is someone that's an interesting punt tight end option this week, or an interesting Bengals part of your stacks this week. Any interest in Uzoma?
I mean, he had his, season high 6 targets against Jacksonville in the Thursday night game and put up a splash day there. Otherwise, if he doesn't reach the end zone, he's kind of a dud. I don't think I'm really playing him. I won't hate. I'm never going to say I hate a cheap tight end. If it plugs in, Eric Henry, Devonte Adams, and those guys each score 40 points, then you can take him, having a dud. But I'm not going out of my way to play Uzama. It would only be about what that frees up for me.
Agreed. Well, let's move on to the next game unless you get anything else you want to talk about here.
Go for it.
All right, let's do it. This game's going to be very quick. We're going to talk about the New York Jets at the New England Patriots. I'm cheating. I'm calling this a half and half. This is a fade game for the New York Jets. I'm not touching anyone on the Jets. This is a GPP only New England players / stack game. If you are stacking New England, and I mean stacking as in you're playing Mack Jones, I think the Jets...
Think lots before you watch the game. Nothing.
Oh, boy. I think the player you want to run back with is going to be Jamison Crowder. Has been getting target volume, 9 targets versus Tennessee, 6 targets versus Atlanta. I think he's the one you want to run back with. If you really want to be ballsy, you can play the rookie, Elijah Moore, but not someone I'm interested in. Corey Davis had a phenomenal preseason, seeing a lot of targets, not doing much with it. And I think that we know Bill Belichick. We know Bill Belichick takes away the number 1 option on the opposing team. I guess right now it's Corey Davis, so I think Jamison Crowder is the one who's going to get peppered with targets. I think he's the one that I'm interested in. New England players, New England stack, GPPs only. Why do I say that? Because Damian Harris, $5,700. We saw how phenomenal he was last week. 18 attempts, 100 rushing yards, a touchdown, 20.8 DraftKings points. However, it's Ramondre Stevenson's season very, very soon. 5 attempts last week, 23 yards, had a touchdown. 3 targets, caught all of them for 39 yards. Ramondre Stevenson, to me, is an explosive LeGarrette Blount. This is a kid that I think is going to overtake Damian Harris by the end of the season. He's $4,700, $1,000 cheaper than Harris. Someone I am personally going to have in my player pools this week. Wide receivers, Jacoby Myers, again, we're playing him. I don't care. Freaking touchdown robbed from him last week on a penalty was BS. Kendrick Bourne continues to be involved in this offense, just producing and doing work. What a great touchdown from him last week. I think it was like 70 yarders or something. That made up for his week. Don't be fooled by it. Nelson Aguilar, while not seeing a lot of target volume, I think someone that's absolutely in play on a week-to-week basis. However, the one I really have the most interest in, outside of Ramondre Stevenson, Jacoby Myers, is Hunter freaking Henry. Let's not forget how good this guy is. Over 10 DraftKings points in each of his last 3 games. Yes, he has a touchdown in each of those to make up for it. 5 targets, 8 targets, 2 targets versus Dallas. I don't care. Hunter Henry, someone I want to play this week. Jonnu Smith being used probably more as a blocker than he is a pass catcher, but we know is a threat every week. What say you? And I want to talk about Mack Jones too. 5,300. I have interest in him as well. Peter, are you also on the same bandwagon, fading the Jets, New England, GPP only?
I pretty much just fade the entire game. Honestly, here, a little bit of Ramondre, I'm fine with. A little bit of Jacoby Myers, I'm fine with. Corey Davis, same deal. The best play from this game is actually not one of the ones you talked about. It's Patriots defense, and I probably won't be playing much of anything else from it.
We'll get next segment. Don't be jumping ahead. He's already spoiling it, folks. He's spoiling one of our picks. So, spoiler alert. So, you have no interest in any of the skill players then, outside of like a Stevenson or a Myers?
Corey Davis, if you wanted to put in the lineup or two, I'm not going to kill you for it. But no, this is a bad game. It's literally sitting at a total of 43. It's just not a good game. I don't expect it to shoot out. I don't expect it to have sneaky shootout potential. I really don't want to go near it much at all.
I would agree with that. All right, let's move on and talk about our favorite defenses of the week. And yes, folks, I'm making Peter talk about defenses. If you've all listened to Peter before or haven't, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but you always say defense isn't a thing and you just play whatever.
I wouldn't go that far. It matters. I just not inclined to allocate many of my resources mentally to it, given how volatile they are. There are a handful here I'd consider. It's sort of, here's what I'll say. High level on defense, they are reliant on sort of, often fluky type plays compared to other positions. I'd rather try to hit my other spots and let defense wind up where it may. So yes, we can spend some time on it, but I don't have strong opinions.
I think this week, my honest opinion, I think defenses are pretty straightforward, if I do say so myself. Let's get into the defenses that you want to talk about this week.
Number one is probably going to be Arizona. You take a look at the heavy favorites on this slate, and it's the Rams and the Cardinals, and to some extent the Bucks. The Rams defense is 5,000. The Bucks defense is 4,000. The Cardinals defense is 3,100. Let's just make things simple and give me the savings. I think Arizona's defense that if I'm really paying off even a little bit, that's the one I'm landing on.
Probably the chalk defense of the week, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident that they'll be the highest, and otherwise it'll be some of the cheaper ones probably that people are going to.
Well, let's talk about it. What other defenses are you targeting this week for your lineups, or at least thinking about targeting as of this podcast?
Yeah, so I mentioned Patriots as well. If you go into the 2000s range, Baltimore at 29 is fine. I think the Giants at 25, Jets at 24, even Titans at 21 are all ones that I'd be okay getting a little bit of, depending on where salary lines up.
Excellent. For me, it's the Rams defense, the Bucks, the Patriots, the Cardinals, and the Giants in no particular order. Again, this is as of right now. When the lineups are officially made, we have, more to think about what's going into our lineups. Well, we need to get into it here. Let's get into our final segment here, Peter. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, you can find Peter on Twitter at PeterJaguars. You can find me on Twitter at AdamWX21. Don't forget to follow the Main Event DFS Discord, Main Event DFS Twitter account at Main Event DFS, MANE. Also, speaking about the Main Event DFS Discord, link is below. Hit that See More button there in the description below this video. You'll find the link to our Discord. Peter, core, value, GPP, and favorite stack segment. Let's get into it. Let's go one by one. Who is your core this week?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the guys that I've listed here are ones that we talked about, which either is me doing a great job of lining things up and being congruent, or I should have, dove deeper. But with the 10-game slate, a lot of them kind of not being great spots, that's sort of how it will wind up. So Swift or Daryl Henderson, right? I think I'm probably not going both too much, although you can, but picking one of those guys in sort of a similar price range. And then someone who we have not brought up, but I'm excited about this week, is Calvin Ridley. He's 6,600. Started the year at 7,900, all the way down to 66 now. He hasn't had that type of blow-up game. Falcons are getting him back off the London game, and then they were on bye, and so now he's back practicing once again. I think he flies not under the radar because people recognize this price and see his upside, but certainly lower than he should be, given that if we got Calvin Ridley at 6,600 at any point leading up to this week, people would be all over it. So he's someone who I'm totally good with in any type of lineup. Miami also playing with the beat-up secondary right now.
Mm-hmm. I think Calvin Ridley is someone I have interest in for my player pool. Not a core play for me, but I do like the Swift or Henderson call. Value play this week. Who you got?
Yeah, talked about Bateman,
Mm-hmm.
talked about Bateman, talked about McKissick, talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think those are all, key ones that I'd have in there. I'm not sure that high level I'm shuffling my running backs much at all this week. And so I'm going a little bit tighter there. And wide receiver is probably some of the spots that I'm messing around. Tight end, I think if you consider something like Ricky Seals-Jones at 3,700 value, that'd obviously be another name to consider.
I would agree with that. Good choices. Let's move on to your GPP plays of the week.
We haven't talked about the Bears-Bucks game much, but I think there's some intriguing opportunities there. If Justin Fields is going to have a good game, this would be a pretty nice time for him to do it. And so him at 53 makes sense. You would stack him up most likely with Allen Robinson, who him at 5,100, right? He's just continuously dropping in price. Hopefully going to be healthy for this one. Don't know the full status of Damian Williams right now, but if he's not going to be active or not playing too much, Khalil Herbert at 5,200 should be getting a good angle. And just, knowing that he can see receiving work against this defense really doesn't take a lot for him to do on the ground to pay off at 52. And then on the Bucs end, things get more concentrated for them. No Antonio Brown, no Rob Gronkowski. Evans at 6,500, Godwin 59. Those guys are each going to get a good chunk of targets. Other names mentioned AJ Brown and Mecole Hardman, other types of ancillary pivot pieces from the highest totaled game of the week.
I like it. Good calls, and let's keep in mind, pay attention throughout the weekend if Damian Williams is ruled in. I think that makes for an interesting play as well. Bucks, great again, the best defense in the NFL versus the rush. They have been bad versus pass-catching running backs. Example, look at what Gaskin did. Couldn't run much against them. Caught balls and winning for touchdowns. Keep that in mind when you're building your lineups. All right, let's get into it. Your favorite stack this week.
I'm going to circle back to where I kick things off and go with the Rams. I know I didn't say I was wild about Stafford, but I'm inclined to still plug him in here, and we'll go Kupp and then Higbee as the secondary option. Run that one back with either St. Brown or Deandre Swift. Definitely, someone who likes to do bringbacks in pretty much all of my stacks nowadays. And so you can make that a four-man stack with one of the Detroit guys as well.
Excellent. All good plays here. For me, core plays, Derrick Henry and Devonte Adams. I know, shocker. Any thoughts on my core this week?
Here's my question, right? Because, yes, obviously those guys are both wonderful plays. They're also the two most expensive players on the slate. If you can only pick one of them, who are you leaning towards?
Damn. Why you do this to me?
That's the decision you got to make, though, right? Because it's not going to be feasible if you're stacking more expensive teams.
I think it's Adams because of the target market share that he has right now. Yes, Henry's running wild, but I just think this is a mega Devonte Adams week. This could be a 2 to 3 touchdown week for him. I think massive game incoming for Devonte Adams. I'd have to pick Adams over Henry, but that's close.
I agree with you. If I'm leaning one, I'm going to Adams in this week. I think even pricing aside, I'd probably give Adams a slight edge in terms of raw projection.
Agreed. Well, let's get to my value picks here. Ramondre Stevenson, 4,800. Some more players, again, we haven't had a chance to talk about. Let's talk about Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell, 5,100 and 4,200 respectively. And again, you and I are aligned here on Rashad Bateman at 3,400. We haven't had a chance to talk about Sanders and Gainwell much. And Stevenson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Stevenson mentioned being one of the guys I'd consider from that game where he can definitely get some good, work on the ground. You probably need him to fall into the end zone a couple times, but at some point he should be growing into a bigger role. The Eagles running backs are tricky, but I've been seeing Miles Sanders' name popping up a little bit and having good efficiency. It's just a question of how much he's on the field and how many touches he's going to get. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Gainwell. Probably not going to be getting much to Gainwell, though, so I'm lean Sanders of the two.
The reason I mentioned Gainwell, in games where the Eagles have to come from behind and throw the ball, which is a good chance they have to do versus the Raiders, Gainwell's been the one on the field and been seeing a lot of that pass-happy work, and it hasn't been Sanders. At least that's the impression I've gotten from the games that I've watched with them. That's why I include Gainwell, but I think Sanders 5100, I think it's a great play this week against the Raiders defense. GPP plays for me this week. Taylor Heineke, Daniel Jones. Both quarterbacks I have interest in for GPPs, both cheap, both very interesting. Darrell Henderson and Daryl Williams, along with Chuba Hubbard. Look, a wide receiver there are tons of them: McLaurin, Moore, Ridley, Evans, Woods. I'm a GPP player. I'm going to have exposure to quite a few players this week. What are your thoughts on Taylor Heineke, Daniel Jones? And another one we haven't talked about is Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, not super excited about the quarterbacks, I think, but Hubbard's a good one to mention, and I'm kind of surprised that we haven't brought him up at any point so far. It's not an exciting game by any means, that Carolina-New York Giants game, and that's part of why Daniel Jones isn't someone who's really popping on my radar, even though he has some athleticism. But even if Hubbard isn't getting quite the McCaffrey or Mike Davis receiving workload, he's doing very well on the ground. This is a pretty reasonable price for him, and I am totally good to get him in there, a decent bet.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to my favorite stack of the week. I know, this is a shocker. It's Rodgers plus Jones plus Adams. The more I think about it, the more I'm slightly leaning off Jones, and I want to go somewhere else. But I think Jones also a good play, and like you said, leading this team second in targets. I really like the stack, but Jones is a current question mark for me. Maybe I go a little Tanyan. Maybe I mix it up and go a little Lazard. But I think Jones definitely safe here, too, to run right through this defense, the Washington football team defense.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you think about sometimes, hey, can I just do one quarterback and one pass catcher? And given Devontae's target share, that almost makes sense. But conditional on Rodgers being a star quarterback on the week, he's probably going to throw a touchdown or two somewhere else. And so I think Tanyan would be the next guy I would go to, is saying, look, all he really needs is to score one touchdown at his price, and 3,500, fall him into the end zone. All of a sudden, you have your tight end position knocked out as well. So probably Tanyan would be my secondary guy to pair up with Rodgers, McLaurin, or McKissick as bringbacks there. But I like the general thesis.
Excellent. Peter, any final thoughts on this slate before we head on out of here?
I think it's going to be relatively concentrated on the teams and games that have the most appeal. We're looking here where you've got a good chunk of teams that just have kind of gross totals and whatnot, or a few blowouts on the slate. So be interesting trying to get creative even in the few games that are more likely to have the attention on them. 10 games in total, going to need some good scores to pay off, even with the bye weeks and whatnot. And I just say keep thinking about ceilings as you're playing tournaments.
Sounds good to me. Peter, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. Really appreciate you having you on. Maybe have you on once again before the end of the season. Maybe twice. Maybe we'll do a three-man podcast. We will see. So thank you for joining me here. Again, you can follow Peter on Twitter at PeterJaguars. Follow me on Twitter at AdamWX21. We'll see you next week for the Week 8 preview podcast here at Main Event DFS. For Peter, I'm Adam. Good luck on the slate. Latest, peoples.